The views and opinions expressed on America's Workforce Union podcast and its digital media channels are solely those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the producers or sponsors.
Welcome to the America's Workforce Radio Podcast, the flagship production of the American Workers Radio and Podcast Network, where organized labor and its never-ending fight to protect the rights of the American worker come first. Now, presented by LIUNA, Laborers International Union of North America. Here's your host, Ed Flash Ference.
The battle continues over collective bargaining at the VA. Meanwhile, workers at Canada's second-largest airline on strike. And today on the show, how the Screen Actors Guild and the American Federation TV Radio Artists came together after decades of trying. Welcome to the Wednesday, August 5th edition of America's Workforce, where we're available on at least 5 platforms, including YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. Well, today we are continuing our series we call 132, Labor 132. This Labor Day, well, marks the 132nd anniversary of the creation of Labor Day as a national holiday. And our featured guest is Duncan Crabtree-Ireland. Now, Duncan is the National Executive Director and Chief Negotiator for SAG-AFTRA. That's the Screen Actors Guild, American Federation of TV Radio Artists. And we're going to talk about the merger that happened in 2012, which, by the way, was decades in the making. If you go back to the late 30s, specifically 1938, entertainment workers unionized across the coast with multiple organizations, all representing workers in film, radio, and live performance. No TV back then. With the field expanding and television on the horizon, the president of Actors Equity, Frank Gilmore, asked a simple question in a letter. Why not form a single union that represents all performers in the entertainment world? Okay, that was 1938. It didn't happen until 2012. Now, Duncan came to SAG-AFTRA at the beginning of the millennium in 2000, right around that time. And he was one of many that worked on the merger of SAG-AFTRA. And he's also going to talk about the time period, you know, what SAG went through during the 1950s with the Red Scare, the role of Ronald Reagan. That's right. Ronald Reagan was once the president of the Screen Actors Guild. We'll touch on that. This is a big part of labor history, especially when it comes to entertainment. SAG-AFTRA.org is a website you want to go to. Our featured guest today, Duncan Crabtree-Ireland, a bright guy, one of the many bright people at SAG-AFTRA. Now, a brief look into the world of labor, the segment brought to you by Boyd Watterson Asset Management. You can find more at boydwatterson.com. Over 4,000 WestJet flight attendants, all represented by the Canadian Union of Public Employees, are now on strike after collective bargaining agreement negotiations between the airline and the union broke down. WestJet, the second largest airline in Canada and the 8th largest in North America, announced that the strike has resulted in the cancellation of over 300 flights. Now, the cancellations come during a period of very busy holiday traffic as travelers celebrate Canada's Civic Day, which was a pretty long weekend. WestJet flight attendants cite the airline's refusal to compromise over wages as motivating their strike, with unpaid groundwork being a very contentious issue. The attendants are currently not compensated for work they do on the ground, both before takeoff and after landing. They're working, but they're not getting paid. Air Canada flight attendants went on strike for similar issues until the Canadian government forced them back to work using Section 107 of the Canadian Labor Code. Now, Section 107, increasingly used by liberal governments to force striking workers in federally regulated industries back to work, could also be used to end the strike at WestJet. The American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE, is challenging a third attempt now by the Department of Veterans Affairs to terminate its collective bargaining agreement. Last Tuesday, AFGE filed a motion in U.S. District Court in Rhode Island asking the court to enforce prior orders for the VA to bargain. Now, in March, District Judge Melissa DuBose issued a preliminary injunction preventing the VA from terminating a CBA, which covers about 300,000 agency workers. Judge DuBose issued another order for the VA several weeks later to enforce the injunction after the agency again attempted to terminate the agreement. Well, now the VA seeks to terminate the CBA on grounds that the agreement expires on August 8th. And the agency is under no obligation to extend the contract or negotiate a new one. However, AFGE argues that the CBA contains a, quote, duration of agreement, end of quote, provision that automatically extends the existing contract for so long as renegotiation is in progress. Because the VA and the union began preliminary contract negotiations over email on the 19th of May, which is within the 30-day window during which the duration of agreement provision can trigger, the union contends that the agency cannot terminate the contract. This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy, but hats off to the American Federation of Government Employees doing everything possible to preserve that CBA. This is not an easy situation for them. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, how the SAG-AFTRA merger happened after decades of work. Back in a few minutes. You're listening to America's Workforce.
You're listening to America's Workforce with Ed Flash Ferens.
It takes LIUNA to keep America running. Over 70,000 public employees are part of LIUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, delivering critical services such as healthcare and emergency response, as well as maintaining roads and sanitation systems. Even the National Postal Mail Handlers Union, representing over 47,000 U.S. postal workers, is affiliated with LIUNA. Find out what it takes for LIUNA to keep America running at liuna.org. That's liuna.org.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Communication Workers of America. You can find more at cwa-union.org.
There is unity and strength for workers.
We are the USW.
We are the USW.
The United Steelworkers.
The largest industrial union in North America.
We represent 850,000 members in the U.S., Canada, and the Caribbean.
We work in metals,
Rubber,
chemicals,
paper,
oil refining,
atomic energy,
and the service sector.
We are steelworkers, standing strong and fighting for what's right.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers. You can find more at ifpte.org. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Ironworkers. You can find more at ironworkers.org.
Now, back to America's Workforce. Here's Ed Flash Ferens.
And remember, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That would be AWF Union Podcast, AWF Union Podcast. As I pointed out at the beginning of the show, this is a continuation of our Labor 132 series. We march toward Labor Day, 132nd anniversary of the creation of Labor Day as a national holiday by then President Grover Cleveland. And it was in 1894. And some are still trying to take credit for the machinists and the carpenters, still trying to claim as to who was first to get to the president's desk. That's an interesting story that Tom Buffenbarger, who is a machinist, he shared that with. He's going to update us on that because it's so great to look back into labor history and see how things were accomplished. And we know one thing, it wasn't easy, especially for workers. It wasn't easy. And it wasn't easy to merge two unions. Joining us as our featured guest today is Duncan Crabtree-Ireland, who is the National Executive Director and Chief Negotiator of my union, SAG-AFTRA. SAG-AFTRA.com is a website in that capacity. He oversees the world's most influential union of actors and media artists. We're talking over 160,000 members worldwide. who work in film and TV, broadcast news, commercials, music, radio, video games, much, much more. Duncan, welcome back to the show. Almost 26 years, talk about history here, almost 26 years with SAG-AFTRA, but we're going to go back into time because we're celebrating the accomplishments of organized labor. There are many. And I did a little research on my own here, and I know you were in the thick of things when AFTRA and SAG got together, finally. But boy, it took a long time. Why don't you take me back to what finally happened in 2012? Go ahead, my brother.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. And Flash, thanks so much for having me on. It's an honor. So, Screen Actors Guild started as a union in 1933, right around the same time what was then the American Federation of Radio Artists was starting as a union as well. Really, from even some of the earliest days, there were questions about whether those two unions should be together. But I think what really brought home that notion as being an important thing to be working on was the invention of television. Because as you can sort of imagine, we had the sort of cinema union, Screen Actors Guild, we had the radio union, AFRA, and when television came, it's kind of the mix of cinema and radio because it had the live broadcast qualities of radio and it had the visuals of cinema. And from that point forward in the late 40s, early 50s to 2012, there were a number of attempts to merge these unions, probably 3 really big ones, maybe another 4 or 5 sort of smaller efforts that didn't take on that huge momentum. Even during my time at the union since 2000, there were 2 merger attempts. First one unsuccessful around 2003, and then the second one during my tenure successful in 2012. I think that as someone who had the chance to work in these unions where I was in the Screen Actors Guild, but worked for one of these unions during 12 years prior to merger and now about 14 years since merger, I have to say that the unity, the power, the effectiveness that the merger has brought, I genuinely believe has been a huge benefit to our members. I think our power in bargaining is stronger, our resources are stronger, and there is no need to devote resources to dealing with issues between the unions because it is one union. And that's just been a wonderful thing to experience. But you're right, it was not easy to make it happen, that's for sure.
Yeah, let's talk about that history. Why was it so difficult? Obviously, there was a clash of the titans here. I don't know. And there's 2 parts to this, too. When you joined the union almost 26 years ago, let's start off with that, if you don't mind. Did they say, hey, Duncan, we want you to put these 2 unions together? Was that part of when you came to SAG-AFTRA?
No, it was not. I started out as a staff attorney at Screen Actors Guild. So I started as just a regular worker in the legal department at SAG-AFTRA, and I gradually had the opportunity to take on more responsibility over the years. And in a career path no one would have guaranteed, predicted, or necessarily even contemplated. I ended up being our national executive director and chief negotiator. But in 2003, I worked on the merger a little bit as from the legal side because that was my role as a lawyer. But in one of the many sort of interesting facts about all of this, the 2003 merger was largely led by then National Executive Director of AFTRA, Greg Hessinger, who by interesting coincidence has now, just in the last year and a half or so, become the president of the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. So in fact, in our last negotiation against the studios or with the studios and streamers, Greg Hessinger was the chief negotiator on the other side of the table for me. So it's something. It sounds like something out of a plot written by a writer, and yet it is the real truth.
Yeah. Hey, you're supposed to be on my side. What happened here?
Although I will say, I think the bargaining did reflect the fact that Greg learned some things about what the reality of the work life of performers and broadcast journalists are. And I think that was evident in the way that he handled the negotiations. But yeah, it was funny. Yeah, for sure. And
it's not uncommon. And what I have followed a lot is, the union busting industry. which is huge, like $1.7 billion a year. A lot of law firms are involved in that. It turns out that a lot of the people that they hire are formerly from unions. They didn't like what was happening, or, it just wasn't their cup of tea, but they decided to jump the fence and work against unions. So, yeah, it's interesting to see the dynamics of this whole thing. Now, what do you know about the history going back to, and, when you go back to the 30s, that was a great time for unions. Think about it. FDR, labor law, minimum wage, all these things, a Fair Labor Standards Act, all these good things were happening. And this was the time when there were some discussions of perhaps, maybe we should get together, strengthen numbers. What do we know about that?
I mean, I think in terms of the founding of both of these unions, really interesting and very different founding. The founding of AFTRA was, at least from the history I've studied and what I understand, was a very grassroots sort of effort that led to an initial convention. It was, driven by a lot of folks working on air and radio, and really sort of built a culture in AFTRA and then AFTRA that really came from that grassroots sort of perspective. In Screen Actors Guild, the initial founding of Screen Actors Guild was done by some of the biggest movie stars of the day in the early 1930s. In fact, we have a photograph in the headquarters of the founders of Screen Actors Guild, and pretty much every one of them is a name that you would know if you were someone who knows about, film of the 30s, 40s, 50s. And yet both of those sort of foundings, even though they started in sort of a different way, led to the same result, which is to a widespread sense among the workers in the industry that they really needed a union. In the case of Screen Actors Guild, I can tell you that was motivated in part by a decision by the studios to unilaterally impose a 50% pay cut on everyone, and that did not go down well, as you might imagine. And in the studio system era, that was particularly problematic because a lot of people were bound to a company. It was in a way like a company town. They were bound to the company for a long period of time, and if they didn't play ball, they would get sidelined and their career could be completely destroyed. So it was a tough time in that sense, but the unity that they brought in both of those forums, in the AFTRA forum and the SAG forum, I think it really sort of precursored what we saw for the following decades as both unions built strength in their respective areas of jurisdiction.
If you don't mind, I want to touch on the 1950s, McCarthyism, the Red Scare. We saw actors lose their jobs because of what was going on, which, as you know, was a bunch of crap, okay? And some of that is happening to some degree today. I'm not going to get into that. Maybe another show. But I just want to reflect on that as far as what the union did to help those people that were targeted.
I mean, I think, first of all, it bears to be said that I don't think that certainly on the Screen Actors Guild side, which I think is where most of the sort of known history in this area lies, because a lot of it was very, very public. I don't think that we can conclude that Screen Actors Guild did everything it could have done or should have done in defense of people who were either truly or falsely accused of, having a political philosophy which should have been viewed as protected under our Constitution and, our freedom of association, our freedom of speech, our freedom of thought, fundamentally. So I don't think that the union did everything it could or should have done. And in fact, sort of one of the mixed elements of that was the fact that the president of our union during that time, Ronald Reagan, had a central role in sort of clearing people off of the blacklist for actors. And the interesting thing about that is, on the one hand, he had the ability, and he did help get people off the blacklist. But, taking on that role in a way sort of also kind of validated the approach in the first place. Because if you're the person who's willing to say this person should stay on and this person should stay off, then you're kind of saying the concept is okay. And I think that in retrospect, that's really not something that any of us would say. I hope we'll never find ourselves in another position where something like that could happen. My confidence in that has been challenged a little bit by events of recent years, but I do hope that our union would handle something like that very, very differently, and I believe we would. And I mean, in fact, in some examples recently, such as the the sort of debacle with the Jimmy Kimmel show and Jimmy Kimmel, there was an immediate response to that was not condoning, that was not appeasement. It was, really calling that out and doing everything in our power, along with a whole bunch of other people who did a lot of stuff to help sort of say this is a line that shouldn't be crossed in our constitutional society.
It's interesting you bring up Ronald Reagan, because if you go back to the early 80s, wasn't he kind of taken off the union rolls after he fired the air traffic controllers?
Yeah. I think, that his life path's so interesting because some people don't know this, but in 1960, Ronald Reagan led the Screen Actors Guild strike that established two of the most important things that the union has ever established, which is residuals, which are payments for ongoing use of work, and our first pension and retirement plan. And so that was a direct result of a strike led by Ronald Reagan, who then obviously in a big moment of, horror, confoundment, and irony, 20-ish years later, took an incredible retaliatory action against the air traffic controllers for exercising what I think should be viewed as everyone's fundamental right to withhold their labor in a collective way when management isn't treating them fairly. And obviously law is questionable or more problematic in that area when we deal with government employees in general and with public safety employees and air traffic controllers in particular at times. But yeah, I think that it is a part of history that it's very troubling and interesting how that path happened.
And we need to talk about things like that because it is interesting and people need to know about what happened there. I have to take a quick break. I want to get into the fact that you were behind a very successful merger when it finally happened. We'll get into that next. Our featured guest today for Labor 132 is Duncan Crabtree-Ireland, National Executive Director and Chief Negotiator for SAG-AFTRA, and he was the main guy in that merger. We'll talk about that next right here on America's Workforce. Back in a few.
You're listening to America's Workforce with Ed Flash Ferens.
American workers are sick of struggling to get by. It's time to get ahead. In the Teamsters Union, workers are winning industry-leading contracts, historically high wages, fully paid health care, and retirement benefits you can count on. Across the country, Teamsters fight alongside our brothers and sisters to secure a better life. It's what we've been doing and how we've been living for more than a century. When we fight, we win. Join us. Be a Teamster.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Heat and Frost Insulators Labor Management Cooperative Trust. Find out more at insulators.org/LMCT.
America's Workforce appreciates our sponsor, the Columbus Central Ohio Building and Construction Trades Council, who represents more than 18,000 workers from 19 affiliated local unions and district councils.
Are you an experienced mechanical insulator looking to take your career to the next level? Insulators Local 50 in Central Ohio has steady work for a number of years. Insulators Local 50 offers a total wage and benefits package that can't be beat. It's not just the competitive wages. Local 50 also provides medical, vision, and dental insurance with no paycheck deductions for you and your family. Don't miss out on the chance to secure your future. Join us at Insulators Local 50. Earn great pay and the best benefits. Visit insulators50.com/AWF50 to fill out the online form, and a Local 50 representative will call to begin the process.
Now, back to America's Workforce. Here's Ed Flash Ferens.
And remember, you can check us out on at least 5 platforms. That includes YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. And when you get an opportunity, here's what you do. Just sign up and receive our shows on a regular basis and give us a rating. Always appreciate those 5-star ratings, so please keep them coming. I want to do a shout-out here to the Ohio-Pittsburgh group over there. And I had an opportunity to go to the SAG-AFTRA picnic, which they do every year in northeastern Ohio. It was a fun time. And the food was wonderful.
Yeah. So glad you could make it.
Duncan Crabtree-Ireland is our featured guest today. He is the National Executive Director and Chief Negotiator of SAG-AFTRA. And this is part of our Labor 132 series, where we take a look back at what labor has accomplished since Labor Day was created in 1894. And Duncan, it was not easy, getting to this merger. I mean, it was tried and tried again, and finally it happened, and you were in the middle of it. What made it happen? How did it happen? There was a lot of things that had to be discussed here, and my gosh, it had to be a labor of love for you. It's a good thing have an attorney background on this whole thing, but what made it work finally?
Wow. It was funny in your intro, you said something about me being at the center of it. And I would just say, I think any successful union merger can never be something that any one person drove. Right. And I was lucky enough to be really involved in it. And I will always consider that one of my greatest experiences in my professional career. But it was literally hundreds of people that helped make this happen. And I think, some of the most important credit has to go to the elected leadership of both of the unions at that time. It had been tried before several times, but, I think one of the things, and I always say this in our negotiations, our strength as a union is we never give up. It's persistence. It's that collective bargaining cycle. It's if we don't and can't get what we want in a given cycle, we'll come back and we'll go for it again, and we will eventually get there. In this case, I think that's very much what happened, which is over a period of decades, efforts were made to merge the unions. That was a high bar because to do so under each union's constitution, there had to be an 80% yes vote amongst the members. The previous times that it had been tried, a majority had voted for it in both unions, but not to the level of the required supermajority. And so the real question was how to deliver a merged union that was so clearly in the interest of members of both unions that 80+% would vote for it. And I think in an ironic way, one of the things that helped make that happen was some actions by the employers, especially the studios and the streamers. Well, actually, I guess it was just the studios. Then the studios in 2008 that led to an environment that really recognized why we needed to be one union, and that having two unions sort of jurisdictionally representing people in the same space was harming the ability of either union to get the most for their members off the table.
The combination of these, the TV movie producers, it's, they got this sense of bigger is better, I guess. And we've seen mergers in all shapes and forms over the years.
Yes.
And,
Oh my gosh. Even right now.
Yeah, we're exactly. Can we say Paramount?
Yeah, I'm down.
Yeah. The very fact that happens, I guess that kind of accelerated from what I'm taking from your comments here, that kind of accelerated things. Hey, wait a minute. You know what? They're getting bigger. We have to get bigger. Is that what I'm hearing here?
Well, I think that's true. I do think that to keep up with and really be able to hold your own with these, increasingly large mega corporations that run the media and entertainment industry, your union has to be as strong, as resilient, as powerful as possible. And it needs to bring together just everybody who has the talent, skill, and desire to work in those companies, because that is fundamentally what they really need, and that is what they will listen to, is that leverage and power. And in 2008, what really happened was AFTRA and SAG just made different decisions about how to proceed in a contract negotiation. The employers, from my perspective, looked to leverage that sort of lack of unity between the two unions. The result of that was a very significant change in how work was divided in especially primetime scripted television. And the result of that was that a bunch of people lost eligibility for their health insurance, and their retirement benefits were impacted. And when our members saw the tangible consequences of not being able to have a true sense of unity about contract standards and negotiations amongst the two unions who were bargaining together at that time, it became really clear that a world in which we had two separate unions bargaining over the same work with the same employer at the same time was not in our members' interests, and they didn't want to lose their health insurance. They didn't want to have their pensions reduced. And so that really ultimately motivated people to just find a way to bring those cultures, those different union cultures that were both great in their own way, but very different, to bring them together and find a new SAG-AFTRA culture. And I think we've done that over the last decade plus. And that's one of the reasons why you say it's a successful merger. I agree it's a successful merger. But I think part of it is because we have found a way to bring the cultures together. And it's not perfect, but it is really good. And in my view, it is even better than I had hoped it would be when we were doing it. So that's a good place to be.
Oh, that's a huge accomplishment. Okay, one more question here. And I appreciate your time here, Duncan. Our featured guest today on Labor 132 is...
Of course, it's an honor.
Duncan, oh, come on now. Duncan Crabtree-Ireland comes from my union. Well, I started in AFTRA in 1974. And then the merger happened in 2012. Are we done? Okay, there's other entertainment unions out there. What do you see? I'm throwing a big one here at you. Duncan, what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think that decisions like that have to be driven by what's in the interest of the workers and the members who are involved. And so there's no, further merger plans on the table at this point. But I can certainly imagine a world where as media and entertainment continues to consolidate in these big multinational companies, there may be a point where we all say, why are we still doing it this way? We should come together and form the most powerful entity we can, because now these employers have come together. I mean, Broadway is definitely not dominated by the media and entertainment companies that we bargain with, but there's already connection there, and it's, who's to say what the future may hold. But right now, we're really just focused on making sure that we're delivering the absolute strongest representation possible. And frankly, Flash, in this era of AI development, is a huge focus, and a huge part of our resources are really working on making sure that the implementation of AI in the media and entertainment industry does not result in the worst possible set of outcomes, and that human creativity, human credibility, human insight, human trust, in the case of our broadcast journalists, that's protected, preserved, and lifted up, because it is under threat by AI tools that may save a penny or a dime here and there, but that can't deliver any of those things that are so critical to our society. So that is a big part of what we're focused on right now, and I think everyone's aligned. Everyone in our side of the table is aligned on those points across all the unions, I believe.
No, you have to be. There's no question. Well, Duncan, you are welcome here anytime, and it is a pleasure to have you on. And I say this so many times on the show, this is your show too. We hear workers' voices, and you're making those voices louder. That's what it's all about. We can't drown in this craziness going on. We have to keep raising our voices. We got to make sure that workers are taken care of, because they need to be taken care of. Duncan Crabtree-Ireland, National Executive Director and Chief Negotiator for SAG-AFTRA. SAG-AFTRA.org is a website. You take care, stay safe, and stay in touch. Okay, brother?
Thanks, Flash.
And that'll be it for another edition of America's Workforce. Tomorrow, the Central Ohio Building Trades. Until then, all of you have a safe and wonderful day.
That concludes another episode of the America's Workforce Radio Podcast. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. America's Workforce is a production of Labor Tools and BMA Media Group. Find out more information online at labortools.com.